So sometimes with material we're learning in class, the details they can be very dry. So instead of just going through all the little things, we go over how to use the particular tool, and then I make a sort of supplemental video to go along with it. So the first part of this we touched on in class, and then the rest is going to be new. So this is about layer properties. So layer properties are found in the layers panel, and they are a way to deal with the edges of a layer. So if I'm looking at a picture that is exactly the size of the document that I'm working in, and you get to layer properties by double clicking in the blank space here, I can do stuff like put on a stroke or whatever, and I won't necessarily see anything. It says it's previewing it, it says it's there, I don't see anything. Bevel and emboss, I might have to turn it way up in order to see anything. Um, it's meant to turn that off. Um, add to the edges, to deal with the edges. So we need something that has edges that we can see and that we can deal with. And there's two different ways to do that. There's, oh dear, there we go. Bringing in graphics or objects that are not the exact same size as the document, or text type. So I use the type tool to make this, which is why it is technically still a live thing. I can, change the size and the color and things like that. And then this is just a PNG from an open source website that I brought in. So if we put the star in here for a second and I double click on that layer and we go to, actually let me zoom in a little, there we go. I bring up the layer properties. So I'm going to go to bevel and emboss, and if I click the tab right here, it's going to activate it, but I have to go to the actual thing to start turning up levers, because the default for these is going to be very, very subtle. So if you want to see how it works, I have to, for example, turn up the size on that. Ha! See, now you can start to get an idea of what it will do. It's adding this little bit of an edge. I can soften it a little bit or not. You can change the angle so that it's coming from a different side, or I could mess it up entirely. Direction down. You can see the light is changed now that I changed the, there it is. So you can see how changing the settings, it can get a little bit tricky. Things to look out for in any of these layer properties. The size is sort of the amplitude. And obviously it goes from a nice subtle trick to, oh dear, very quickly. A lot of them deal with the angle, which is what direction light or something is coming from. You can change the direction of it. There's the depth. I'm not entirely sure what that's changing. But there's usually edges that can be softened or hardened depending on what you want it to look like. I can also, on the highlight mode, right now it's set to screen so that it's a little bit less intrusive, but I can maybe try to set it to something else to see if it will. It's not really activating it too much, in part because I can turn up the opacity. So it's a very bright color. So how do you get a highlight to show up in a bright color? Well, I turn up the opacity of the bright color, right? So there's a lot of settings. Bevel and emboss is a tricky kind of thing. Now, let's say I've got it, it's perfect, I hit OK. You can see that both the things are under here, and I can turn off all the effects, or I can turn off just the bevel and emboss, which is really nice, and I can double click to bring them back up. And if you click this here, all it does is deactivate it, but you can turn it back on. So it's going to remember your settings, which is really nice. I want to go to the text because there's no outline on it. There's an outline on the star to go over some of the other ones. We're not going to go over every single one, but I want to highlight some of the most important ones. So if I double click on that, I can put an outline around something, which right now it's, click on stroke. Oh, it's orange. That's not very helpful. It's an orange typeface. What stands out against the blue? There we go. This is a very silly color. It's not going to look right. I'm going to turn the size up. There we go. So you can give something an outline. Now this is obviously ridiculous looking, but if you have like an inset photo and you give it a black border right here, it's really nice because let's say I do need it to look silly. This is, I don't know, for a kid's birthday invitation. Um, well, what happens when I need to change it? This is all non-destructive. I can sit here and I can say, sky instead, and those same layer properties are going around here. And I know sometimes people find tricks to do like simple borders around things by putting squares behind the images. This is a lot more effective because it will change with the type. It'll change with the shape. Anything you do, if I go onto this layer and I put an eraser to it, it just changes where the bevel is. It's still going to be there. It's just going to change what it considers the edge of the shape because it's going by the alpha channel on that layer. All right, sticking with the text because it's simply easier to work with. I'm going to turn off the stroke for a second. We can, let's see, an outer glow is very common. So I have to turn up the sizes on these things a lot because this is a very big image. We're in the like 2000 pixel range and everything here starts at like 1 or 2. But I can turn up the size of that, which means I should also, it's a very bright sky, so I'm going to turn up the opacity a little bit. You can do like a scatter with a lot of noise or a little bit of noise to give a little bit of texture. Let me see, what's another? Kind of change how it goes from A to B, basically, like how it goes from brightest to darkest. But you can see how if you mess it up like I just did, you can reset it to default. And then I know the things that I changed that I liked changing, and that's set to like, I don't know, 10 or something. Had it up a little bit too much, but you see how that can work. So you've got an outer glow. There is a drop shadow, which is, and again, you have to remember to click on the thing in order to see the settings because you can go anywhere, turn it on, and then not see the correct settings. You have to go back here. Drop shadow is exactly what you expect of it. It's I have to turn up the opacity. If you turn up the size on something, you usually have to turn up the opacity in order to see it. And in this case, I'm also having to, I guess maybe turn up or down this. Aha, distance. There we go. So I can make it look like it's kind of like a piece of paper hanging over another picture, and there's light hitting the whole thing. So there's a lot of different kinds of tricks you can do with that. This makes it look like it's two separate things, and there's like extra dimension, as opposed to taking off the distance and giving something more of a drop shadow just to kind of like, I'm going to put a little bit of distance, there we go, just to kind of give it a little bit of, detail. There we go. That's like standard drop shadow, just to give it a little bit of separation, right? There's a difference between having this little bit of separation and having, oh, these two things are several inches apart kind of a deal. All right, but drop shadow is very, very commonly used. One that would actually work on the photograph is something called, wait, I gotta zoom out, inner glow. So inner glow is, or inner shadow, either one of these things, inner glow or inner shadow, it goes to the inside of the image. So if I turn this up so we can see it, could give something a nice, there is a limit to these sliders. If you want it to be bigger, you'd have to type in a number. I'm going to turn up the opacity so we can actually see it. And you can see for something this big, it's actually getting a little slow because it's like kind of doing a lot. But this is kind of making the edges of the photograph look like they're, it can be a halo effect depending on how you use it. If you change the color, you can make it look like it's, burnt or something. You can make things look like they're damaged. You can give it, well, actually, the way these settings work, this is going to work with bright colors, but it doesn't have to be, white and black. Anytime there's a color swatch, like right here, you can double click it and change it. If you want it to look like it's darker around the edges, you need to do this inner shadow bit, which is similar to the glow, only it's a darker color, and because of things we'll get into later why, but basically if you're darkening something, it's very, very different, what's the word I'm looking for? Math than when you're lightening something up. And you can see that there's all sorts of settings. We're going to be learning what some of these words mean like later. But one of the nice things is just to be able to click around. I've said this with a couple of things. I said it with the adjustment layers. I'll say it here. You got to just click around. You got to click on things and see what it does. See what it there we go. So I'm like, I wonder what choke does. Well, I'm going to turn it all the way down, and it turns out that what it does is it takes that black edge, and instead of being right at the border, it says, well, no, I want there to be a little bit of, like, I want it to be closer in. Like the gradient to start at black and actually come in this way. Let me see if there's any others that we would really use. Bevel and emboss people use a lot. Stroke. You can try any one of the. I'm going to try the sign with a star. They also change depending on what it is you're doing. So how these things work on these examples I'm showing you might be very different than how they work the next time if you have a blue star. Because this color is interacting with this color, and so it's going to be very different than if you use that color. Right? They're interacting with each other. So you might find the perfect settings for a bevel and emboss, and then you put it on something else and it works completely differently. That's to be expected. But I would stick with bevel, stroke, inner and outer, or inner shadows and glows, outer glow, drop shadow, which is an outer shadow, just slightly different. You know, those are the ones that kind of people get the most bang for their buck from, and they can be very, very useful. All right, and we're going to be using these throughout the semester, depending on what it is we're trying to do. They're just going to kind of crop up as like a little thing. Hey, we're going to put this on here. It's going to be the last part of this. They're meant to be finesse. They're meant to be, oh, I took that off. You know, they're meant to be a little bit extra. They're not meant to be the whole work. You're still going to have to use other tools for the main bits. This is sort of like the finesse that goes on at the end.